And tonight's guest is one of my absolute favorite attorneys. I know I say that about a lot of people, but David Morneau, who is the recovering litigator, has been a close friend and collaborator with us for, I don't know, the past couple of years. There he is. We actually did a consumer series in person in May of this year. It was super cool. David and his wife flew down from Canada. All right, David, flip your camera around. And Angie, there you go. And Angie, who is the fourth one of our client as consumer series, came, and we had, there she is. I see boss lady, Tio. Yeah, so we had such a good time together in New York and Connecticut a couple months ago. So it's wonderful to see you, David. David's also the author of the foreword to our book, and we're talking about other ideas in the future. And I wrote earlier in a comment, it's true, everybody loves you, David. Everyone who met you at the event is like, he's such a great guy. Like, really, David's like a genuinely good-hearted person. So I'm so glad that we've been able to do all these collaborations together and have more in the future. And I'm glad we have a sort of abbreviated version of part of what we did in person. And that is the client as consumer, how to advocate for yourself with your own attorney, since so many of our people are dealing with pressure from everybody, and occasionally it's their own attorney that they feel like they have to learn to stand up to. So welcome, David.
Can you hear me? Thank you very much. Wow, I mean, what do I say to that? Andrea and I had a wonderful time meeting you and Chris and Angie, and the time that we spent in New York. Broadway plays, last minute tickets, folks. If you need any tips, reach out to me or Lisa. Yeah, I noticed that my earbuds stopped working, and now all of a sudden, yeah, it's weird. Whatever. It's you know what? It's one of those days where I feel like the world is conspiring a bit against me. So, but I'm so happy to be here. So proud to be contributing. So proud of the work that you and Chris are doing. Such important work. The more that I work with families, the more important augmenting our failing system with people like you doing what you do to keep people's temperatures down, to help manage expectations. You know, the system's a tough place. You guys know that, and what you bring to the table is so important. And the people that I'm getting to meet along the way too, who recognize that as well. This is going to be, to me, the wave of change. How we're going to effectively change what a lot of people refer to as a broken system. So thank you for the kind words. And it was nice to meet everybody at the book launch. That was great.
Yeah. Well, okay, so let's get to it, David. David is I like to say you're a very chatty person, which is wonderful, and I am too. And sometimes we go way over time. We almost were late to our own Instagram Live because we were video chatting. But let's get to it. So David came up with this great list. Everybody loves lists of, it was 10 and I think it's 11, like ways that you can advocate for yourself with your own attorney. And I love that you are an attorney bringing that perspective to the table.
Yeah, well, you know what? It turned out to be 11, Lisa, because I think we forgot about the U.S. conversion to Canadian. So you know what? We'll call it that.
That's a good one. I like that.
As opposed to me coming up with this list late at night and my brain being weary, and I had 2 10s at the end. So, yeah. So you know what? Top 10 list. And guys, this is not meant to be an exhaustive list. My approach to law is a lot different. You know, for those of you who know me, I'm the recovering litigator because I did do the hardcore litigation for probably the first 15, 16 years of my career. And, you know, there's a story behind why I stepped away from courtroom, because I was fine. And it actually had to do with suicide of a young person in a case that was probably my most successful case, where I represented one of the parents, and the young person a number of years later had committed suicide. And quite frankly, I mean, I don't know what the circumstances were at that point in time, but what I was able to do is observe the system on its, in its whole, the personalities and the players within the system. And I think that's the genesis of this list, Lisa. I think it's conversations that you and I were having and just putting it all together. So, I mean, starting at number one, and this is going to sound so basic, but very basic premise is you're a human being. And when you're in that relationship, when you're uh, working with professionals, you need to feel like you're being treated like one. And it sounds trite and it sounds simple. And the reality is, I see it taken advantage of day in, day out. I mean, I hear people all the time saying, and in fact, when I was reading through some of the posts today, Lisa, on when you were promoting this, there were people talking about how they had to battle with their lawyers, how they felt like they weren't being treated like human beings. So you know what? And as a tip to lawyers out there, you're juggling a lot. I get it. I've been there. I've done that. But you need to recognize that this person in front of you is a human being who's hurting, and who needs our wisdom, and really doesn't need a hero. They need somebody that can really give it to them straight. So we'll get more into that as we go.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because just in the past week, we've not including our little trip to California, but we talked to a couple of one coach who's a friend of ours and a client, and they were telling us the most awful stories about the way that the lawyer was treating them, as well as the coach talking about a situation between one of her clients and an attorney that she sat in on a call for over Zoom, where the attorney was screaming at the client, just screaming, impatient, insulting them. And I was like, wow, and that's supposed to be your ally and your advocate. And I don't know if you remember, but a couple of weeks ago, maybe I did a post that came out of a comment one of our clients made that said, my own lawyer is giving me PTSD. And it
Yeah.
seems like, I don't know how often you see that, but it's definitely an issue in this community where people are terrified of their own lawyer. Sometimes the lawyer reminds them of their ex, sometimes the voice or the sound of their voice, or just the way they communicate it really contributes to the trauma.
Well, and you hit on a very key point. I've had people come to me talking about how they feel like their lawyer has treated them like their abusive ex.
Yeah.
And it's astounding. Now, again, not defending lawyers, but having been there, one of the things that I think we need to invest more time in is that development of the emotional intelligence. And again, Lisa, this is why what you and Chris do is so important, because if my role, even if I just isolate my role and it's meant to be legal, having people like you, coaches like you, that can help, formulate the questions and come to their lawyer prepared and know what they need to do, what questions they need to ask, helping them distill down a lot of the emotion that you see. That said, yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen lawyers get abusive. Typically, that tells me that the lawyer's more concerned about getting the outcome than how people are getting there. And that's one of the things that often gets lost in the system too, is it's really about results. It's about the end. It's predicated on winning. And really, what is winning? I mean, you've been through it. Tell me what winning means.
Well, I know for me and our clients, it's like I need to be able to move on with my life
Yeah.
and have some kind of peace. And that's the thing, is like winning in court, it doesn't mean that it's going to continue. Like you still have to have a relationship. If most of our clients have children with their exes, you still have to figure out a way to communicate and co-parent and survive and not, most of the issues that we see are post-judgment. after people get, I was the same way. It's like, I can't wait for this divorce to happen because then this is going to be over. Then the divorce
Magically.
happens. And part two, the terrorist campaign, the co-parenting hell of like the threats and you're a bad parent and all the stuff where it's like, but we just finished. And now they have to learn to navigate and sort of deal with the power dynamic and learn to assert themselves in that relationship and not basically continue the cycle of abuse, but post-separation on another level.
Well, and not just that, the litigation abuse that often happens too, right? You mentioned it. You just get out of court, you're going back in, and that's the element of control. That's one of the things that the system still hasn't figured out, how to effectively curtail, right? Well, it's, due diligence, and it's it's a system that's we have to keep our ears open. We have to be able to say these, to review these things along the way. Nothing's fixed in stone, but litigation abuse happens all the time, and sometimes that abuse actually comes. I've seen it come from the lawyers, and more recently, I was involved in a program, and I asked a judge, a U.S. judge, and it's. Granted, this is a topic that will draw some attention, but if you know that lawyer has a tendency, has a penchant for doing things like that, at what point have you ever um, given repercussions or penalized that lawyer for their behavior? And the response I got was, well, I can't do that in the state that I'm in, but what I can tell you is I can issue a cost award against the client. Well, I'm like, you're punishing, it's like telling a child not to do something, and I'm trying to think of what the analogy was. There was a good analogy about, but just they're following your behavior, and you punish the child for something that the parent taught them, right? It's somewhere along that line is the analogy. It's just it's crazy, and we don't look within. The system tends not to look within. So people, you walk out, you get the judgment, you think magically I'm going to wake up next morning and there are going to be rainbows and unicorns, and instead you wake up to thunderclouds and lightning.
Yeah, I'm going to have to talk to you outside of this interview about a woman that I interviewed recently who's a disabilities attorney and advocate, and she's also a professor. And we talked about, I think the title of the interview was like the secret protection in every courtroom. And she was saying that there are accommodations that you can ask for, especially if you have a diagnosis like PTSD. And she said one common thing that people ask for is the judge makes sure that there's civility in the courtroom, which you think, shouldn't that be happening anyway? But this is something that you can specifically request, where if a judge says, I can't do it, it's like almost, makes me think of almost like an individualized education plan for a certain type of student, like a special needs student, where no, you have to make this accommodation. And I thought, that's brilliant, but why can't it be that way for everybody?
Well, and I think there's a lot of things that can be done, um, augmenting the system right from the very start. I mean, the system itself, going into it, it's waiting and waiting and waiting, and there's a higher level of combustibility that tends to grow and mount, and it's almost like letting some of the air out of the balloon earlier in the process. There's so many augmentations that you and I will talk about again, and I'm sure we'll come up with we'll figure out a way to have another Instagram live to talk about it. But let's really take a deep, hard look at this system and say, are we really, really helping people? Because I guarantee you, based on the posts that I see to what you guys are putting out there, a lot of people say, no, I expected it to be, and it's not that at all, right?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, that's part of what legal abuse is. Like this book that I read recently on legal abuse syndrome talks about how people's most common feeling is rage at the injustice.
mhm.
And interviewing Donna too, she said more and more people, they're just so angry because the system that we turn to relief for relief ends up making things so much worse on so many
Well,
levels.
And how many people have come to you having just received the application or that initiating document, and they're like, it's full of lies? And do you think that they can pull themselves away from it? Now, eh, again, there's perspective, there's lies. Those documents are often created. I mean, I was good, in fact, I was an excellent creative writer when it came to those documents and affidavits and things like that. You know, there are liberties taken. You know, it's taking that little thing and making it a mushroom cloud, right? That one circumstance where something happened which probably shouldn't have happened, and making it into so much more. And it's really incendiary. I mean, the system itself, and it seems to promote that. I don't care what anybody says. That's what it does. It invites you because it's predicated on winning, because it's that I have to prove that I'm right. And ultimately you get in front of a judge that says, well, you know what, if I believe you, then you're right. If I believe you, then you're right. You know, you have good lawyers. Why don't you figure it out? Well, why isn't the judge a part of that in the system to take a more compassionate approach? And again, back to point one, recognize that these are human beings. They aren't the problems that they're presenting. They're individuals who require that assistance and the expertise. What I've come to find actually doing collaborative law and mediation makes me realize that it's much more difficult to stay on a higher level to try and keep things moving forward than it is to pull the plug, say screw it, and go into the anger mode. Even for lawyers, it really is. I mean, it's so much easier to take that off ramp and go into fight mode. And that's what you see. That's our systems are overloaded with cases. People can't, get their day in court. And when they finally do get their day in court, the court doesn't have enough time to deal with it, so they get pushed off to another day and another day and another day. And we're not really doing anything. And I suspect that it's similar in the United States as it is in Canada.
I would say you described years of my life in litigation.
Yeah. Oh, we're going to adjourn. We're in any event. Why don't we keep moving forward? Because this kind of feels like our presentation.
I know. All right. So we got to number one.
Yes.
What's number two?
So number two, I would say do your research. Don't just go with the first lawyer that pops up in your Google search. Although I'm not a big fan of Google reviews because I think there's a lot of manipulation that can happen, there's typically, if you take the time to go through it, there's some good information when you read it. You can often tell the false positives or the false negatives in there. People often, if they're really happy or they're really upset about something, they give some explanation, they give some context. So, again, as much as we seem to be a world kind of driven by reviews and Google reviews and making sure that you're ranking high, and to me that's problematic in and of itself, it's still some information that can be good for you and can help you understand. And if you're picking up on certain things and you meet with that lawyer, you can ask questions around that too. And which gets to my whole view that this is all about empowerment. It's not about victimhood. It's not about labeling and I know our system is built on blame as part of justice, but really what it is, this is really about empowerment to move forward, empowerment to get through the circumstances that you're in and follow a course that stays true to your own values and your own objectives, and really do some soul searching within yourself about, what do I want the world to look like? I can't control what that other person's going to do. So yeah, and again, Lise, you know me, I deviate on tangents, but I mean, it all goes hand in glove to me.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the point was do your research, but also think about what it is that you want in that relationship. But I don't want to step on your toes because I know that's coming later.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So next one, number three is I always recommend, and even when people are coming to me, interview more than one lawyer. I usually say to people coming through my door for that initial consultation, although I might be the one that's asking the information, or the questions and teasing out the information, you really should be interviewing me as much as I'm interviewing you, because this really is about personality and fit and how we're going to work together. And I'm very transparent in how I communicate. I believe in trying to teach people the same thing, how to be transparent in your communication. Um, and when somebody's personality, I don't think will fit with me, typically there's somebody else that I know where the personality may fit better. And you know, I often hear people, well, I'd like to go with you. And I say, okay, I do things this way. What if you interviewed a litigation lawyer as well? You know, and I'll help them prepare some of the questions that they might ask the litigation lawyer, because even though I don't do litigation, it doesn't mean that litigation is off limits. Litigation is still the right course for some people to take. In fact, for a lot of people, it's the only course, right? So making sure that you're prepared when you go into that meeting. So I guess in a sense, sometimes when I'm having those initial consultations, I do a lot of what you and Chris do too, because it's not about ego for me. It's about how to help that human being that's sitting in front of me get from the turmoil that they're in to a place where they can conceive of a better tomorrow. You know, and it takes a while. But sometimes that means recognizing that, you know what, I might not be the right person, but hey, you know what, I have an idea. I know who you might work well with. I've gotten to know the personalities, and um, I don't see it as, oh, if I don't take this client on and take their money, then another one may not come through the door. I think the goodwill that I'm putting out there means that um, people will always come, because I'm very transparent and very communication is very important to me when I'm talking to people. You know, making sure that there is that clarity of understanding. And
Well, you think about in any kind of relationship how communication is so important to have a healthy relationship. And especially with an attorney, there needs to be good communication. And I'm thinking about our difficult cases where there's a lot of interaction. I know my first attorney for my divorce, I knew the moment we had our consultation, I didn't even want to meet with another lawyer. It just felt right, and it was right.
yeah,
And he became my best friend for that year. I paid him a lot of money too, but he was, looking back, I probably should have used other resources, but he was also very emotionally intelligent. And I felt like he cared, like he really cared. And I felt like he was a real ally and advocate. And for people dealing with these really difficult situations where most of the time they don't understand what's going on, it's so important to have someone in their court, in their court,
yeah,
in their, not in court, but in their,
corner.
yeah.
Well, and you know what? I find that it's often important to have several people. You know, the days of the lawyer being, it gets to my fourth point. So don't look for the lawyer to heal or save you, and be wary of the lawyer who tries. Our lane is legal, and really, when it comes down to it, only you have the power to help or heal or save yourself. And it often requires other people with the right expertise. Now, I think my expertise helps complement that, but my lane is legal, and I need to stick to that. You want me to stick to that because it's hella expensive to get me to start dealing with some of the emotional unpacking that often needs to be done. You know, and I'll give an example. So on social media, uh, I become known as being a lawyer who's IPV, intimate partner violence and coercive control aware, but I recognize I'm not an expert in that. And when people reach out to me, and I typically have one or two a week, and identify that they're survivors, my first instinct is to look to the experts, whether it's a local shelter, and I've been able to connect with many in Canada and across Canada, and some in the United States, or professionals that I've met along my journey, and connected with, uh, connect that person with that organization or that professional. That's where I can help, helping to identify what they may be going through, but also helping to identify, what, I get it, you want to talk to me about this, but when it comes down to it, I don't have that skill set, that level.
Wait a second, Dave. So you're getting some compliments from people that we know, including Nicole that I interviewed a couple weeks ago. Legal but wise and compassionate, Dave. You do that. And then Mama Maria said, agreed.
Maria, hi, Nicole. Well, and it is. I mean, when we think about it, in ego-driven professions, sometimes the professionals lose sight of that I'm one person. I don't need to know everything. I've talked about it before that they can develop a white knight or a savior complex, that they feel they have to save this person, save the person from the other spouse, save the person from themselves, right? Where they say, well, I can't allow you to make that decision. Well, when it comes down to it, if I'm doing my job right, and you have all of the information that you need, Lisa, to make a decision, then I've done my job well. And I think you and Chris ascribe to that too, that principle that, you know what, it's about having the information to make a decision. It doesn't matter whether I make that decision or not. My job may be to say, have you thought of, or what if, but ultimately it's up to that person. And that's part of the empowerment, that um, the role that we have, that sometimes I think we take for granted, the power that we have, and doesn't always get used responsibly. So often when we go into that savior mode, I've found that we can do more harm than good. I found that the justice system is definitely not the place to resolve the complex and emotional components of family law that people bring to us. So sometimes that may mean, before you take that step in that direction, build the foundation under you. And that's what I'll often say to people. Let me help you build your own foundation so you can then move forward. But if you don't have that proper foundation, then, the house is likely to topple at some point. So it's very important to me. I often say, when that person, comes to me and it's the weekend's just happened and they had their big blow up, and they're coming to me on Monday morning, at that point, maybe 5% or less of the issues are legal. Most of it's emotional, psychological, sometimes criminal, depending on what's happened. There are so many layers and nuances that need to be explored in those situations that sometimes we get the mindset, okay, I need to jump into that savior mode.
Yeah. I mean, we see that all the time. And what you were talking about regarding family court not being the place, don't you find that people's number one goal, who don't understand what really goes on, says, you say, what do you want? What are you looking for? I want the judge to hear my story.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be heard. And how many times we say that is not going to happen? That is not a realistic goal.
But if we as professionals are doing our job and that person feels heard, that can be as healing and cathartic and helpful than, Judge Judy sitting there and saying, I find that you're a liar, because it never usually works that way. It very rarely is it. We tend to have this idealized vision that court is like that episode of Judge Judy, where it's going to wrap up at the end, and they're going to see through the crap, and they don't. And along the way, you usually have judges, after you've spent tens and sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars saying, can't you guys just resolve this? Right? You know,
Yeah,
Nicole,
like it takes two, it's both of you. And the victim's like, oh my gosh, what does it take for the truth to come out? Why don't they see it? Why are they allowing this to go on this long?
well, and Nicole, who we mentioned earlier, our mutual friend, Nicole had come up with this beautiful vision of a compassionate court system, where the system itself is augmented by the different professionals. Because when you think about the intersections of family law, you know, there's a lot of intimate partner violence and coercive control that goes. The system actually, I think, a lot of times, I've said this in interviews, that I'm surprised that there aren't more fatalities coming out of the family justice system, because it is a powder keg, right?
Mm.
But what if you augmented that with the right professionals, and helped? And again, I'm not saying it's perfect. You know, I think a lot of people are looking for that perfect answer. But again, if we can empower, people can manage through, people can get through and be better on the other side. Um, the idea that I'm just going to hand it off to somebody else and they're going to make the right decisions for my family and for me, um, I don't know. It's we have to be working together. And I think the system can do that. And I think the system can actually, if they have the right augmentations, the system can actually help uh, curtail things like legal abuse, right? Uh, Make sure that there are consequences, not just, yeah, and take a holistic view right from the start. It's a stretch, and I mean, it's not something that I think I'll see in my professional lifetime, but I hold out the hope that we actually take a good hard look at things and do better, because we can. We have the ability. We have knowledge more than we ever have on things like trauma and, you know, and mental health issues and all of these other things where we seem to see the intersection. When we used to simply just think it was a legal problem, family law problem, we're now seeing how all of these things come together. Well, let's start uh, helping the whole rather than just helping a part, right? You know, let's try and take a more holistic mentality. And that means we're going to have to give way to the fact that as lawyers, and I think this is one of my other things, we don't know everything,
Is this your
right? So,
number five,
no,
David?
my number five is know what you're looking for in a lawyer. Um, I don't know how many times people come in and they said, I need a pit bull or a shark, typically meaning somebody who's aggressive. Always remember that this is your life. Don't let someone else take it over. Those people that hire the sharks or the pit bulls, if you were to uh, jump forward with them, I think many of them would say, yeah, I thought that this was going to happen and it didn't happen at all. It's not like things move forward faster. In fact, if anything, things get bogged down more because, you know, the whole defensive cycle, defensiveness will beget defensiveness, and you end up on that hamster wheel
We call
for
it the pissing contest, actually,
yeah.
here in America.
Well, yeah, I've called it all kinds of things, but lately I've called it the hamster wheel. You're just spinning and spinning and spinning, and you're not going anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. So much of what you said, like I was thinking about, and when we were doing our presentation in Connecticut, we met Ken Novenstern, an attorney from White Plains in Westchester, who's part of a pod of collaborative divorce professionals. And Chris and I did a presentation with them. And we met a mental health professional that I'm also going to be interviewing named Mickey McQuaid. But we were talking about so we talked about the importance of collaborative divorce and collaborative issues with several people involved, like you said, like a team, but always to have a mental health professional who's neutral to sort of keep the tempers cool and to use proper psychology during negotiations. So it's not just about blame and accusation, but it's trying to get this couple out of here as unscathed as possible. And there's ways to do it, but the way the legal system, like you said, it's inflammatory, it's a powder keg, it doesn't work. When people are feeling attacked, they walk away and they do worse things.
Well, and lately I've kind of identified, I think some of the travels that I've had more recently have caused me to really think about, you know, two emerging personalities that are meaningful to me right now. And those people are, they're the need to be right people and the need to get it right people, right? And being able to identify the need to be right, you have to be careful. It doesn't mean that they don't have a place, but there tends to be ego around it, whereas the need to get it right, there's a level of humility there and the ability to stand back and say, this isn't my area of expertise. Let's find somebody else who might be better help for you or for your
Yeah.
family when you're coming
David, I
through it.
know in our book when we quoted you, I think you have said in previous interviews as well, I know what I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I've said that. Well, they don't. You're. It's a spoiler. That's coming up. That's coming up. Well,
I
so
forgot.
number six is what I've come to find is beneath every position that somebody has that I hear from a person, there's usually an underlying need that's unmet. And conflict tends to live in these unmet needs that, as lawyers, we usually don't explore because we get caught in the emotion. And what typically happens when we make decisions, or what typically happens when we make decisions based purely on emotion. So it's important when I'm working with people, and again, I'll say this, legal is my lane, but I do challenge people to explore their own needs. As a lawyer, I have to do that too, because I have to recognize when I have somebody in front of me and I feel all of a sudden my nervous system's getting triggered, right? So what's going on here? Notice it, be able to calm myself down so that I can be attentive to that person. And there really is a skill to it, but we all have the ability to manage it, no matter what trauma we come from. I think for some of us, depending on what we've been through, it takes a little more practice than others. But when you feel a certain way, notice it, label it. Nicole would tell you, name it to tame it. And
Oh,
when
yeah.
you do label it, ask yourself what need is attached to that. So, for example, if you're being triggered by your partner being dismissive, it may make you furious. Temptation might be to say, I'm pissed off because they won't listen. I need them to listen. Uh, but you have no power in controlling what they do or say. So turn it inward, right? I have a need to feel, or respect is something that's important to me, right? And being able to recognize that, and it's more likely to trigger a different response when you're able to kind of take that step back and be that third party observer of your own situation. You'll give a different response than you would in the first statement, which would tend to be a defensive statement. And what we find is the defensiveness. I mean, court thrives on this. Defensiveness begets defensiveness, and then you end up with a plethora, litany of affidavits going back and forth about how each person is the worst person than the last affidavit, and how it's so much more. Um, you know, when you're seeing, I mean, try and notice that when you're engaging with somebody. If you push back in a defensive way, watch what their response is, because I think we're, as human beings, we're almost programmed to get defensive back. I'm defending my territory. And oftentimes what happens is you end up losing sight of what the original concern was. So try and remember that and observe it. So, when somebody approaches you and says, you did blank, whatever, fill in the blank, and your response is, yeah, well, I did that because you did this. You're on that hamster wheel again of defensive arguing and, never really going anywhere, but just justifying what you did and how it was the other person's fault, right? That laying of blame. A lot of this stuff comes from my research, and again, not an expert, but trauma. I like to try and explore My background's in psychology. Quite frankly, it was my straightest line to get into law school rather than staying in math and science. But I found that observing people is, to me, is fascinating, but it's also helpful. You know, being able to hold that space for somebody when they're in their most vulnerable moment, being able to gain their trust is, to me, that's what I value as a professional. I don't have to heal them. I don't even have to ultimately agree with them. I mean, sometimes you have to deliver the bad news, no matter what. But I respect the fact, and I love the fact that people feel comfortable opening up with me, and that's something that I, when I retire, um, which hopefully at some point I will retire, uh,
No, no,
it's something I'm going to hold very close to my heart, right? That you know what, you were in a difficult situation, and I didn't necessarily have to have the answer for you, but I was able to allow you to feel heard. I see a lot of lawyers without, a shred of emotional intelligence, make a lot of money keeping people in the emotional state, fueling these emotions, and even getting caught up in people's muck. That's what I'll tell people, I don't get caught up in your muck. I care about you, but these aren't my problems. You need me to stay distant from it because you need me to be as objective as I can. And it allows me to not only be able to tell you the good things, but also the things that maybe don't work in your favor, the bad things. And
you,
that's so,
you're
so important.
Yeah, I was going to say you're reminding me of a conversation I had a little bit earlier today with an attorney in New York named Asia, who was saying that sometimes her clients will say, I need you to tell the judge this, 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 and it's coming from an emotional place. And she said, sometimes it's hard for them to understand. If I went before the judge and just gave an argument, and then the judge says, what basis do you have? And I have nothing. I've just ruined our credibility. So I cannot be emotional. I can take in your emotion, but that doesn't mean that I have to do exactly what you say because it's not necessarily going to work in court. But
Yeah. Well, it just, again, it's fascinating. It actually is fascinating. I do watch Judge Judy and how she can pick apart, right? There's the evidence, but then she starts to mentally put together the story and starts asking questions. Now, I don't know which comes first and whether she's truly revealing what happened, but it's fascinating to watch how she'll pick up on one thing and go in that direction, really start to pull, people often give you those threads to pull at, not to unravel the sweater, but just what, they're like little pings. A friend of mine calls them pings, and notice them, right? And
Kings,
maybe say it once, and then you hear it the second time, and you say, I noticed that you've mentioned this a couple of times. Do you want to tell me a little more about that? Right? And usually that's when you start asking those kinds of questions, and you're really starting to get to the core of what's going on. People don't think in terms of legal issues. They think in terms of, how do I get out of this bad situation? How do I end up where I need to end up? Right? We don't think in legal terms. We don't wake up in the morning and our life is a contract. We think in human terms, but when you have that mix, sometimes it's tough. And we see it. We take it all in. People have this romanticized version of what court tends to be, of what this process tends to be. It's not a Hallmark movie where at the end, although I've had those situations where at the end people are embracing and there was catharsis to it. Oftentimes that's not usually where where that is worked through. Although as professionals, we definitely need to take the approach that we need to do no harm. And over the course of my career, I mean, a lot of what I'm saying, a lot of the insight that I'm giving are probably mistakes that I made as a professional, going out. Now that I'm older, I'm a grizzled veteran, I can actually point back to myself and some of the things that I did that I was able to step aside and say, when I did that, was that really helpful for that person? Or was that really helpful for that family? Um, Sometimes the incompatibility is, but that's what my job is as an advocate, right? The struggle is real.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot. All right, David,
Okay,
let's go get to
we're done.
number 6.
Number 7. We're at number 7
Oh,
now.
7.
So,
7.
so I
We're
say,
almost, can you believe we're
always
almost
ask
at an hour?
yourself. Yeah, what's that?
We're almost at an hour.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll try and get through these. Ask yourself, what are your values? By this, I typically mean, who do you want the world to see you as? Not the court. Forget about the court. But who do you want the world to see you as? Evaluate your values. There's all kinds of research out there. There are words that you can pull from the internet. Identify that. Right. I asked the question because and I'm very transparent in my communication, because the number 8 is, I also ask, what are your objectives? What do you want to achieve? It goes well beyond the question of what do you want the court to do, or what do you want? Be it custody, support, whatever. And I ask those questions, and then usually what I'll do is, I'll get thoughtful answers from people. They didn't expect a lawyer to ask them those questions. And then when I circle back, I'll ask, do you want to know why I asked that? And they do. And it's that, and I see Nicole use the word authenticity, being able to be transparent, authentic, to be able to say to them, well, you know what? There are going to be bumps in the road through this process. I need to know what your values are, because that tells me how I can best approach you in those circumstances. And I can remind you of the words that you've given me about who you want to be, how you want to be seen, what's important to you, what your objectives are. So it's extremely important. Number 9 is be very wary of the lawyer who gets caught up in your emotions. While people may see it as comforting at first, people usually need a lawyer that remains objective and stays out of your muck. Again, there's that muck word.
Yep.
It's what allows us to remain objective. And then number 10, contrary to what some lawyers say, we don't know everything. And other professionals are vital, especially in complex emotional, financial, and other situations. Are they willing to help assess what or who you may need on your team, and do it from the start? So, make sure you're asking these questions. Having others to assist with the person through what may be the most difficult time in their lives, in my experience, is never a bad thing. I like to be able to stay in my lane, as skilled as I am as helping people identify their emotions and needs. Problem is when professionals aren't willing to communicate with one another. So you need to talk about these things. How do you communicate? Ask these questions. Again, when you're talking to a lawyer, interview them as much as they're interviewing you. Um, Being able to pick up the phone or engage in occasional Zoom meeting is very important. Now, one of the things, for those that know, I was actually, I practiced for 20 years. I stepped away. I came back after a couple of years, and I decided that I was going to do things differently. So the days of having 50 to 100 people that I'm assisting, I can't do it anymore. I thought I could. I came back and I'm like, well, I'll just pick up where I left off. And I realized very quickly that I probably wasn't servicing many people, let alone myself, very well when I was working like that. So, asking those questions, and I get it. There's kind of I'm hearing it certainly in Canada that there aren't enough family lawyers, and I suspect that if it's a problem here, it may be a problem in the United States in different areas too. But ask those questions. How are you going to communicate with me? Um, you know, Having that's how you're going to feel like you're supported, as opposed to the lawyer that simply will just tell you what you want to hear. Our natural instinct, I think, as lawyers, is to help people. Most of the people that I certainly talk to would say that. But I think it's, it seems to be why we got into this to begin with. But a lawyer really does have to be able to recognize, back to what you said earlier, what they know, but more importantly, what am I going to say, Lise?
What you don't know, but that's your quote, David. So I just said your own quote.
Yeah. And knowing what you don't know and bringing other people in to help with that. Well, perhaps well-intentioned, although not always. I mean, but the lawyers that do it that way are few and far between. I think the lawyers that I've tended to work with do tend to care. But while they may be well-intentioned, they're treading into a territory that they may not have the expertise, and that can have damaging effects. And I think Nicole, I saw one of her comments is it is often it's well-intentioned, but the harm results in any event. And that's where understanding trauma, not just as a professional, but people understanding their own trauma too and exploring that. That's what's going to help you move forward.
Yeah. So let me just look at the time. We got a couple of questions, but did you do number 11 yet?
One left.
Okay.
And
I don't want to stop you.
Always remember you steer your own ship. You receive the guidance from your navigational team, whoever may be on that team, but don't let someone else take the helm from you, even though you may not feel like steering that day. Wow, I was really on the ball when I wrote this the first time. I like that. I got nautical in there too.
You did get nautical.
All right, that's it. So 11.
Okay. So one of the things, and I don't know how we're going to try and limit it to 5 minutes, David. And remember at the beginning of this conversation off camera, you said that you didn't feel like you had much to say today. What did I say?
Yeah.
I like to always go, see?
I've never known you not to have not enough to say. Yes, I know.
All right. So I'm going to answer one of the questions very quickly. That was about how do you communicate when you're dealing with post-separation abuse? That is such a huge topic. So I'm just getting one word: strategically.
Yes.
Strategically. So that's like a whole thing that Chris and I train people with, that we do with more than anything. It's an art form. It is not a simple thing to do.
And Lisa, that coaching is tremendous. Again, you want to talk about an area that requires other individuals other than lawyers, because I work with a lot of parenting coordinators that will help with that strategic communication afterwards. Don't get a lawyer to do it, right? You know what? There are many people like you guys out there that are doing these things, that are helping people. That there is so much value in that.
Yeah, I mean, what we always say with the strategic communication that we teach is it serves several purposes. One, it turns the power dynamic around in the relationship. It really does, like, slowly, the same nautical thing, it steers it in a different way, and you can see things start to change. It documents, it turns hearsay into evidence, and the big thing, because we always focus on presenting as the best co-parent ever, because we're dealing with so many custody battles, is you're making yourself look really good. You're making yourself look cooperative. You're matching the values that the court is looking for. So when you are eventually back in court, because often our clients are, you're ready and you understand why, and you have built a paper trail of what you need. And this is what worked for me in my own case very, very well, was building that paper trail, using strategic communication years ago, which my lawyer told me to do without labeling it that, and it really worked out. Yes, this live is saved, by the way. We got that question. And I don't know, David, if you could answer this in the next few minutes. But someone is saying, with false allegations, is there a way to show the lies without appearing defensive? These are big, hard questions.
Well, you know what, Lisa, I actually think that what you were talking about earlier, or just when you answered the last question, I think there's strategic approach
Yeah.
to be taken with that, right? It's really react. So number one, recognize how it makes you feel, react, and what you're feeling inside your own body, so that you can regulate yourself, help regulate yourself, or have people around you that can help regulate, those with the expertise. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a level of strategy that goes along with that, and I think that would be the advice that I give, without getting more into what's there. I mean, I don't think either of us has met any particular client who's been in court, or even when they're negotiating outside of court, that doesn't say there are lies attached to that. Some
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes, and again, it's a matter of perspective too. And sometimes they're just outright lies. That does happen too.
Yeah, I mean, the piece of advice I would give is that we use with our clients all the time is think about where you want that spotlight to be. Those lies are often served to distract and deflect from the issues that really matter. So if you keep spending your time defending it, every court is very limited. So you have a limited amount of time. So again, like David says, strategically, like, do I want to spend time responding to frivolous nonsense where there's no verifiable proof that it actually happened? So who really cares? Or do I want to say, okay, there's no basis, and let's focus on what we're really here for instead?
That's a good point, Lisa, because I mean, can you really prove a negative? Right? Oftentimes you can have evidence to the contrary, but in many of those situations, they're simply bald allegations without any evidentiary backing, right? So sometimes it's just easier to say, prove it.
Right. But people don't realize that, because they're like, I gotta come in, I gotta defend. We're like, you know what? You don't have to.
No.
It's like this, I don't have to do it. The burden's on the other person to prove it.
Yeah.
And if it's not true, you don't really have anything to worry about, do you?
And the reality is, those judges have been around long enough, typically as family lawyers before, and then as judges on the bench. They've heard it, right?
Their days are full of hearing lies, right? And people think like, oh my gosh, what if the judge believes? Court, as well as the police, their days are full of listening to false allegations.
Yeah.
Okay, so 2 minutes, David. How can people find you?
Well, I'm trying to think, because I think since the last time I have a different website.
You're the recovering litigator. That's the easiest thing, right? On Instagram.
On Instagram, I'm at the recovering litigator. And you can also find me at davidmorneau.com. And start with those two. I'm not difficult to find on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook. I'm all over the place.
Yes. Well, I know where to find you, and I'm going to find you again, and we're going to have many more conversations and talk about our book idea some more off camera.
Yes.
But thank you so much for coming back on. Well, love seeing you, love hearing you, and we'll make our next date to do a Zoom together too.
Thank you very much for having me, Lisa, and thank you for all the work that you're doing and shining a light, right? Like we have to keep doing this. We have to keep having these conversations, no matter how repetitive they sound, because we have an opportunity to make things better.
Yes. And we are, whether we realize it or not, we are having an impact. We see it in people getting empowered.
Yep. We do.
All right. We'll talk soon, David. Thanks again. Hi to Andrea.
Yeah, she's in the kitchen eating right now, so I'll say hi to her.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.